This is a continuation of the reading of the book by Richard Hoskins called War Cycles, Peace Cycles. As this content is related to the broader scope of understanding macro and geopolitics, I felt this to be appropriate to include as part of the Interchain FM podcast. Enjoy. Understanding money is just common sense. Which would you do? You would give Seth a clay tablet and keep the gold. This is the reason for the clay tablet mentioned earlier. It was a loan substitute for gold. The citizens of Babylon treasured their clay tablets. They are found in great quantities today wherever excavating is being done in the ruins of Babylon. We have mentioned the temple banks. They were big ones. There were also government banks and private banks such as the Igebe Bank, which flourished in 575 BC. These banks offered almost every service offered by banks today, including the use of checking, savings, letters of credit, and the Babylonian form of paper money, the clay tablet. The banks kept the gold, naturally. In ancient Egypt, a canal had been dug from the Nile all the way to the Red Sea. Boats coming from India could stop by barges tied up by the side of the canal and get a loan, day or night. At night, these loan boats were well lit so that they could be seen from a long way off. They are the ancestors of the drive-in window in today's banks. There is nothing new under the sun. Persia conquers Babylon. The relationship between nations follows almost exactly the relationship followed between individuals. If one nation desires something another nation has and doesn't have the required payment, the money can be borrowed. If interest is required, as it usually is, trouble is just a matter of time. Babylon had a neighbor to the north, Persia. In the course of trade, Babylon graciously made loans which enabled Persia to buy things she ordinarily would not be able to buy. The loans were made at standard interest rates for the time, 33 1/3%, payable in gold. Persia kept her part of the bargain as best she could. She borrowed extensively and was required to repay double the amount in 3 years. After paying back the original loan, Persia, like Seth earlier, found that there was no more money left in circulation and that she still owed Babylon's bankers the interest on the loans. The king of Persia had other problems resulting from this Babylonian loan. Interest on the loan drained Persia of money. Commerce came to a virtual halt, except for barter. There were no gold for taxes, so the king could not pay his retainers. King Cyrus needed gold. Babylon had the gold Persia needed. Persia went to war against her creditor and conquered Babylon in 536 BC and confiscated Babylon's gold. She also adopted Babylon's usury system. Usury between nations inevitably leads to war. Greece conquers Persia. As Persia spent the confiscated Babylonian gold, there was an instant flash of economic activity. New cities were built, industries were financed, armies outfitted, and palaces were built. The flood of wealth sent Persian merchants to Greece. The Greeks needed Persian wares, so they borrowed with the promise of returning the loans plus interest. A case in point. In 412 BC, Sparta borrowed 5,000 talents from Persia to build warships. This loan, like all the others, was at standard rates. 7 years later, in 403 BC, Lysander of Sparta used these ships to destroy the whole Athenian fleet, which was attacked while they were drawn up on a beach. This event made Sparta number 1 in Greece, all on borrowed money. Let's look at this transaction in a little more detail. If the Spartans repaid the Persians' loan monthly, the payments would have come to 153.19 talents monthly for 7 years. At 33 1/3%, the total repaid would have come to 12,857.96 talents. A tidy profit. If that money could actually have been found in circulation to meet the payments, chances are the Spartans needed the entire 5,000 and everything else they could get together to prepare for the coming war. If this is what happened, the debt would have looked like this. Spartan debt to the Persians at 33 1/3%. 5,000 borrowed, 6,666.65 owed at end of the first year, 8,888.84 in the second, 11,851.79 in the third, $15,802.39 on the fourth, $21,069, $21,069.85 on the fifth year, $28,093.13 on the sixth, $37,457.51 in the seventh. In that day, 1 talent was a substantial sum. 5,000 talents was enough to buy an entire navy. 37,000 talents was an impossible figure. The borrower is servant to the lender. Sparta was forced to use the navy she had borrowed the money to buy. She couldn't allow the unpaid debt to continue to mount. When she won the war, she transferred the payments of this horrendous debt to Athens, and Athens instead became the servant of Persia. The Persians certainly felt themselves the real winners. Greeks were killing Greeks, and their 5,000 talent loan had brought home wonderful riches. It was these loans that drained Greece of money and paved the way for unending war. 336 BC. Alexander the Great. Philip II of Macedonia died. Philip had conquered Greece and placed her under his rule. His son, Alexander, inherited the throne. Quickly putting down army discontent, he inspected the treasury. It contained the equivalent of a measly 120,000 talents, not even enough to pay his army. In addition, he owed 1.5 millions. Alexander had no choice. He had to have money to pay his army and to pay his debts. Greece was bare of money. Persia was rich. She had the money she had taken from Babylon and from her interest charges to Athens and other Greek cities over the years. The pressing need for money forced Alexander to invade Persia. Leading his matchless Grecian phalanx against the Persians, he won magnificent victories and gained an empire, and 440 million in gold from Darius's banks and temples. Rome conquers Greece. The Grecian Empire encompassed most of the known world. A model Greek city was built in each conquered country to demonstrate the superiority of the Greek culture. Each city contained a temple. Each temple was also an interest bank, which made loans. Gradually, the gold in the form of interest payments returned from the people to the Greek temples scattered all over the empire, and gradually, depression also set in. Greek traders established cities in the southern and northern parts of Italy. In the middle was the young, vigorous Roman Federation. The Greek traders traded extensively with their Roman neighbors, much of it on credit, lending 10 gold coins under condition that 11 be repaid. The Romans were hard put to pay their ballooning obligations to the Greeks, and at the same time maintain their armies, which were needed for their incessant wars. Choosing to gain by war what she could not gain by peace, Rome turned on Greece, conquered her, and confiscated her wealth concentrated in the Greek temples and the municipal and the private banks. Basic rules. The basic rules covered thus far, on which all economics and understanding of national and international events are based on these. First, the act of lending at interest is forbidden. Thou shalt not lend upon usury to thy brother. Deuteronomy 23:19. Next, the act of going into debt is forbidden. Owe no man anything but to love one another. Romans 13:8. And finally, if once these laws are broken, other laws come into play. The borrower is servant to the lender. Proverbs 22:7. No man or nation wishes to be a servant or slave. When it is discovered that the interest loan is a trick and there is no way to repay the debt, both men and nations will turn on their lenders. A loan must be accompanied with bribes to keep the rulers of the stronger nation friendly. Babylon was active in the internal affairs of her neighbors. Persia was always active in the internal affairs of Greece. In spite of bribes, in time, the system itself generates a desperation level that bribe money will not fix. Chapter 4. Taxes to start money moving. Interest requires a heavy tax so that money will not be hoarded but circulated to pay interest. Hoskins, fourth law of interest. Taxes. This was one of the most brilliant inventions of the classical age. This is where share the wealth taxes started. While there have always been taxes, the specific reason for these heavy taxes was to milk the rich and start money circulating again. Everyone paid them. The rich in Athens groaned, but they paid. The rulers spent it as fast as they could get it. It worked. Commerce and trade broke out of stagnation, then blossomed. It required rigidly enforced collections to break loose the tightly held money. No holdouts were allowed, since the holdouts plus interest could in time result in owning all the money again through use of the system. This universal taxation, whose benefits were discovered long ago in Greece, is essential to the usury system. Through the years, men have spoken against taxation. Everyone who has paid taxes has wanted to do away with them. But what happens when taxation is abolished? The usury bankers end up with all the money, and none is left in circulation. The only thing that has kept the usury system operating through the ages is taxation. In spite of its beneficial effects, the biggest and most modern buildings in the blighted, debt-ridden downtowns of the world are still banks and insurance companies. Both are active in usury in slightly different ways and have cornered the larger part of the wealth of the world. People who talk against taxation haven't thought the matter through. The only time heavy taxation is not needed is when there is no usury system. Rome's debt solution. Conquest. The first war with Carthage gave Rome 3,200 talents in tribute, and the second war returned 10,000 talents. This money was spent on her debts. In a short time, Rome was hard up again and was forced to conquer Greece. The Greek wealth lasted Rome for a while, and then, like Greece, Persia, and Babylon before, Rome's forced to conquer and conquer and conquer. After Greece came Syria, and then Carthage again. By 14 AD, she had conquered what would be modern-day northern and southern Italy, Sicily, Greece, the immense coastline of North Africa, Turkey, Algeria, Spain, Egypt, and France. By 98 AD, Rome had added Morocco, England, and most of Scotland, and by 98 to 116 AD, Arabia, Mesopotamia, and Armenia. It was becoming expensive to conquer, and the returns were scant. As long as there were nations to conquer and gold to be won, Rome was a vigorous, expanding empire. When the Roman legions were at last reduced to wandering over the hot, barren sands of Arabia and the equally empty, barren steppes of Russia, Rome had reached the end of the line. There was never enough gold to satisfy the demands of usury.